Hey, how's it going? Welcome back to another episode of the Usagi Podjimbo podcast. I'm your host, Mike. As always, this is a podcast all about Usagi Yojimbo, the comic book series. And we are getting into another fun-filled episode, I have to say. We just got done with the Gen story. Now we're moving on to another little short story called The Return of Kitsune, which we've met Kitsune before. She's a fox who is like a pickpocket or like a petty thief, basically. We met her way back in like the duel, or no, it was not the duel. It was Kitsune, but it had to do with like a gambler, I believe. If I remember correctly. But we see this particular issue starts off a lot like the last issue we saw Kitsune in. She's doing her top performance with her tops that she does, and she's doing one where she's balancing five of them all at once. Um, and she's like, "Oh, thank you for the performance. Thank you. It's really much appreciated." And they just throw one little coin in her like cup. She's like, "Oh, this isn't good. They didn't much appreciate my show, I guess you could say. I gotta do what I gotta do. I can't even get a meal tonight," she says, because she doesn't have enough money. So, like I said, she's gotta do what she's gotta do. Kitsune does what Kitsune does. And she goes to pickpocket, and she pickpockets this guy, and he's like, "Oh, that woman was very clumsy. It's almost like she bumped into me deliberately." And he's like, "It's time, you know, not to really worry about that. I got this, deliver this letter." And he's like, "Oh my God, the letter. Where's the letter? What happened to the letter?" And we see Usagi and Gen traveling through the town. And it's good to see Gen and Usagi still traveling together after the last story. I love it when they travel together. I just gotta say that because they make a fun pairing. These men run up to Usagi and Gen, and they're like, "Hey, stop there! Stop right there!" And they're like, "Have you seen a woman running around here?" And Usagi's like, "What woman are you speaking of?" And he's like, "This does not concern you. Just have you seen a woman?" They don't get really specific on what kind of woman. It's just a woman, not like, "Oh, hey, she's a fox. She's a bunny rabbit. She's a cat. Who knows? Well, what does she look like?" There's obviously a lot of women in this village, but they don't really get too specific on this. And the guy's like, "Answer my question." He gets really like abrupt and mad at Usagi. And Usagi's like, "No, I haven't seen anything. And what's going on?" And apparently this woman stole a letter from he was from a guy whose name was Yundi, the oil merchant. And they run off and like, "Oh, maybe he's gone this way, or she's gone this way, And Usagi's no Gen's like, "Why did you concern yourself with those thugs?" And they're like, "Oh, Usagi says, "We're strangers in this town. We got to be cautious because they're still looking for the magistrate's killers." And Gen's like, "Well, I guess you're right. It may not, but I still don't like it. And it doesn't really concern us. As is going on, Usagi happens to he's saying, "Oh, it doesn't really concern us." He goes like, and he sees a top spinning on the ground, and we see, "Oh, Kitsune is here," and she's like, "Oh, hey, it's nice to see you, Usagi." Kitsune, it was you. Then they're looking for you, and she's like, "Oh, it was just a big misunderstanding." And we see Gen's facial expressions change, like from like grumpy to like, "Oh, hey, what's going on here?" He's like very happy, and his eyes like get wide, kind of. And and Gen says, "If she's a friend of yours, we better get off the road. Let's go." Usagi hands Kitsune back her top. Gen kind of, I feel like Gen might have a thing for Kitsune because of the way he's acting. He's very much like, I don't say protective of her, but like, "Oh yes, show her the finer things in life" type of thing, and be nice to her, treat her right type of thing. And Usagi's like, "Oh, please, come on." And Gen's like, "Oh yeah, you're too sweet, to be the person that they're looking for and stuff like that. And Usagi's like, ugh, don't make me sick. It's all sick and whatnot. I don't think Usagi really likes the flirtiness that's going on between Kitsune and Gin, because he makes like a face like, oh, I'm gonna barf, like, bleh, you know. And they go and they get some sushi rolls, and you see Kitsune. She's like, I said, I am the victim of this terrible mistake. And Gin's like, oh yes, of course you are. And Usagi's like, maybe we can help you with this since you did help me with the gambler. And well, apparently she stole a letter from a normal business guy, and it's addressed to Merchant Uden, which is the merchant that we met before. And he's like, there's something going on here. Apparently, the men are securing the town, and I'm frightened. I don't know what to do. And Gen's like, oh, poor thing, And so he's like, hey, let me see the letter. And Kitsune shows Usagi the letter. Usagi says, this is a letter to tell of an upcoming rebellion up in the North provinces. And she's like, oh, wow. Kitsune says, why would they have a merchant be interested in an upcoming rebellion? Because he's an oil merchant. And during an uprise, they normally cut off supply to whatever supplies they need in said town. And he's an oil merchant, so he will rack up his prices for supply and demand, obviously, and basically score big and make a lot of money off this so-called rebellion. Usagi's like, oh, we have to help, we have to warn people, stuff like that. We got to return this letter or whatever, And Gen's like, oh, why are you saying that? Why do we have to do that? You're crazy. We're not even going to get a profit off of this and whatnot. And Kitsune says, don't worry. I don't want you to get involved in this rebellion or officials. I'm just a girl doing my thing, and she kind of like runs off and whatnot. And Gen's like, "Oh, what an amazing woman! I'm sure she knows what she's doing. She'll take care of herself. She's so cute." And Usagi's like, "Uh huh." And Gen's like, "Hey, this was I'm gonna get involved in this mess. Uh huh. I've heard this before, and this time leave me out of it." And Usagi's like, are you saying I'm some sort of a busybody? And they kind of talk to the innkeeper and get to kind of learn a little thing or two. And Usagi's like, oh, so what can you tell me about Yundi? And the innkeeper says, they're money loving skin flints. I don't know what a skin flint is, but it sounds kind of disgusting. And he starts telling me he's kind of basically like almost like an oil baron, almost to an extent. And we see like this, like, I guess Gen hears a sound and he's like, Kitsune. And he runs out with Usagi, and they don't see her. She's gone. And they see that Kitsune's bag is left, and they don't know where she was. She obviously must have been taken. But apparently she was taken without the letter. So she really has no use to Yundi because she doesn't have the letter. Usagi and Gin still have said letter. And, they asked the merchant who was helping them out and feeding them, like, where does this guy live? And they're like, oh, he lives 9 blocks down, You see Gin just take off, and we see Usagi run after him, telling the merchant to take care things, take Kitsune's things in and whatnot. And the innkeeper kind of scoffs at them, like, why do I have to do this? Uh, Grumbling, he's like deadbeats and whatnot. And so they go to Gundy's house, and they're like talking to him and trying to negotiate. And they're like, he's like, you want to exchange the letter for the girl's life? And they're like, yeah, maybe we kind of do actually want to do that, The guy who questioned them before is actually holding Kitsune hostage, and he's like, "Oh, these guys look suspicious and whatnot." And Gen's like, "Not so fast." And he's like, "First, there's a matter of a reward. And Yundi kind of gets uh, boisterous and loud. He's like, a reward? Why you give me that letter you wrote in Scum? I'm not going to give you a reward. And Usagi's like, hey, he was just joking around. Forgive him. He has poor sense of humor. And Usagi calls Gen an idiot. And he's like, hey, it was worth trying, and but that didn't work out so well. And he's like, you fools, you were trying my patience. Hand it over now, or the girl dies immediately. So what do? They hand over the letter. And Yundi happens to see that the letter has been opened. And he gets really upset about this. And, Usagi's like, true, but you have my word that we're not going to reveal anything, that it contains. And they're like, just like when you told me that you didn't know nothing of the girl, the guy who was holding Kitsune hostage. And Yundi's like, kill them, kill them, and Gen says, this always happens when I'm with you, Usagi. And they're holding Kitsune hostage, and Gen actually kills the guy holding Kitsune hostage, and Yundi says, what are you waiting for? He like complains to his guards, and he's like, I'll give you 1 month's wages if you slay them, kill him. And we see this like somebody just jump up and hop in the air, and he's like, stop, stop. And we see that Usagi has gotten behind Yundi, and he's like, didn't you hear me? Stop. I said, stop. Put your swords down. And you see that Usagi holding Yundi hostage, and Gen and Kitsune are fighting off the horde of bad guys. And you're like, stay back, stay back. This is a really cool scene. And so they happen to hold Yundi hostage, getting out of the facilities. And Usagi orders everybody into the courtyard, and Yundi happens to say, "You heard him. Get into the courtyard." And Usagi basically takes Yundi as a human shield, kicks him into all the other guys, and shuts the door. And he tells Kitsune and Gen to basically run, get away. And they happen to run and get away, and they're like, oh, it's so weird that like none of these guys are like coming after us, chasing us. What exactly is going on? It's really weird that nobody has pursued us since we left. They start to speculate, like, oh, will Yundi like report us and whatnot, and for what happened, will the theft and the letter and stuff like that, and the killing of like his guards and stuff. Like, I really know what to do. Gen happens to say, if there's going to be or Usagi says, if there's about going to be a rebellion, we should actually tell the people, but without the letter, we have no real proof as it is. It's word of 3 vagabonds against a town of merchants. And Gen's like, what are you talking about? All this trouble started because you can't keep your stinking nose out of other people's business. And they get into like this big old fight, or like argument. Basically, it's not really a fight, it's an argument, disagreement, as one might say. And he's like, well, you're one who ran off after Kitsune, so it's your fault too, Sagi says. And Kitsune's like, it was your idea to rescue me. Oh, thanks again. I'm so gallant you are. And he's like, oh, shucks. And Usagi's like, oh, man, not this again. Usagi's like, cut it out. We got to get out of here, And they happen to go to the inn where they happen to see a merchant. And the merchant is an oil salesman. And he happens to say, oh, open late, help me celebrate, my good fortunes. Drinks are on me. And everybody's so confused. Like Kitsune's confused, Gen's confused, Usagi's confused. The guy who runs the place is confused. And he's like, yeah, he's like, I'm Arbarej. I don't know how to say that name. I probably just butchered it. He's an oil dealer, and he just made a hefty profit by selling his entire inventory to Yundi, my competitor, at premium prices. And Usagi's like, you You have been hasty. We heard that there were rumors of a possible rebellion, and in the north, which would inflate the price of oil, apparently. And you see the oil salesman, I'm not going to say his name. He takes a sip and he's like, well, I guess I can trust you guys, you know. It turns out that Yundi was getting the best of me for several years and whatnot. And he actually tricked Yundi into believing that this letter was real. It was actually a fake letter that he set up, and he basically tricked him into basically buying all of his oil for a hefty price so he could go double and triple it. But it backfired on Yundi. And Usagi's like, well, I guess it all worked out in the end and whatnot. And Gen's like, what? I almost got killed. You say it all worked out in the end, and Gen and Usagi start to fight again. You know, it's all because of you and your meddling for now, you know. Stay out of my other people's affairs and whatnot. He's like, okay, I will. And Usagi like goes off. He's like, good night, you know. And you see, and Gen says, good riddance to Usagi, and Usagi leaves. And Kitsune says, that wasn't very nice to Gen. And he's like, oh, hell, come on, you know, down soon enough. Meanwhile, since the merchant picking up the tab, you know, we can do what we want, you know, and keep her, you know, and so they continue to drink and whatnot. And so Usagi is cleaning his sword later on, and Gen shows up. He's like, haha, you know, what a wonderful night. Free food, free drinks, the company of a beautiful woman. Too bad Kitsune had to leave. You're still up here? Good, you know. Gen wanted to talk to him. He's like, I was thinking we leave before the merchant discovered uh, the letter was fake. And Usagi's like cleaning his blade and whatnot. And you see Usagi flips Gen and kind of a coin. It's a Rio. And Gen's like, oh, what's this for? He's like, oh, it's some traveling money. And he's like, but I still have all the reward from all the money that was left with me. Turns out that he doesn't, because Kitsune stole everything. And Gen's like, oh man, she pickpocketed me. She had one over on me again. He's like, you knew she'd rob me, and you didn't warn me. And he's like, what the hell? What's going on? He's like, oh, he has this confused look on his face. I love the look on Gen's face. It's funny. He's like, oh, I just didn't want to stick my nose into other people's affairs, Usagi says. And there's nothing like a little shine on a well kept blade, and that is where this issue ends. I have to say, this issue, it was fun. It was fun. I enjoyed it. I wasn't a huge fan of Yundi, the oil merchant. It was kind of, I felt like a generic villain almost, I would have to say. But I did like the fact that Gen and Usagi were still traveling together. And we get to have more insight into Kitsune and whatnot, because we did get her in that little short story we got her in before. But I like seeing how other people interpret Kitsune in different ways. Gen had a completely different outlook on Kitsune than Usagi did, and he got tricked just like Usagi did. They both got their pockets picked in each story that Kitsune was in. It was fun. I liked like the twists on everything and whatnot, with the whole oil merchant getting his the one getting his comeuppance Yundi for the other one. That was kind of funny to see. I liked all the action. It was cool. It's fun. It was interesting to see him holding Usagi holding people hostage to get what he wants, because we don't normally see that in Usagi Yojimbo. But it was fun. I love all the banter between Gen and Usagi. That's classic. And every time I get it, I just have like this big like smile on my face, and I laugh a lot because they're two complete polar opposites. I mean, you know, Gen can't win them all, you know, and he he lost all his money, which is funny to see and whatnot. But yeah, Usagi and Gen complete opposites, you know. And I loved seeing how Kitsune was put into this story. You know, it was basically her fault, even though she said it was a misunderstanding. but the letter really definitely technically meant nothing. There was no rebellion. But it was a fun issue. I enjoyed this one. Uh, I didn't enjoy this one as the last issue, but I did enjoy it as a pseudo follow up to the last issue because Gen was still in it, whatnot, you know. But thanks for listening. If you haven't already, go subscribe to the podcast and whatever podcast platform you're a part of. Leave a review, 5-star review if you want. Comment, give me some feedback and whatnot. Thanks for listening. Hope you guys enjoyed this particular issue. We are moving on to the last Eno story that we will get in quite some time, which will be interesting to talk about and see how that shapes Usagi and Gen later on in their story. Their trip, whatever, their man trip. I don't know what you would call it. Which we get the last Eno story, which ends actually the original run of Usagi Yojimbo, like the first 38 issues, I think. Yeah, 38, 39 issues, I believe. I can't remember exactly how many issues it is. But yeah, and then we move on to volume 2, which starts Usagi Yojimbo's saga, which is going to be a fun ride because there's a lot of Usagi Yojimbo's saga. And I'm going to have a lot of fun talking about that. It took me a while to get through this, I have to say. It took me a while to get through this. I did skip a couple stories in this. Eventually, I will go back. I say that I will go back to them eventually, probably. But at the time, I didn't have the big giant collection for Usagi. I only had the origins when I started this podcast. But yeah, it's fun. It's been fun going through this. I'd love to hear your feedback. Let me know how I'm doing on the podcast and whatnot. And I just want to say thanks for listening. Thanks for staying with me for this whole year, basically. I've been doing this podcast. I've been doing this podcast for a year. Most podcasts don't make it a year. I did take some huge breaks here and there in this recording of this podcast, or this podcast in general, I would say. And I just want to say thanks. Thanks for all the support I've been getting from the Usagi Yojimbo community and whatnot. It's fun, and I'm glad people are enjoying this podcast. It's something I never thought about doing, a solo podcast, because I've usually do a podcast with my co-host from the Otakuology podcast, where we talk about anime and manga and stuff like that, but it really got me out of my skin and have to think on my toes about what to talk about, because technically I'm talking to myself, except I'm not. I'm talking to you guys out there in the Usagi Yojimbo fandom, I guess you could say. But yeah, I just want to say thank you. Thanks for listening. It means a lot. It really does mean a lot that people can come together and talk and discuss probably one of the best comic books of all time, in my opinion. And I love seeing the camaraderie and whatnot. Before I forget, check out Ed Moore. Ed Moore and the Ronin Rabbit podcast. I started listening to him last year. But I didn't even know there was another Usagi Yojimbo podcast out there. But go check him out. He's a lot further than I am. He has really interesting insight into the Usagi universe. So my plug for Ed Moore and his podcast. Go check him out. He's a really nice guy. And we'll catch you guys on the next episode. Don't forget, share the podcast as well. Share the podcast. Tell your friends. And hope you guys enjoyed this particular episode of the podcast. We're moving on to the next episode after this. And hope you guys enjoy the last part of this first volume of Usagi Yojimbo. It's been one hell of a ride, I have to say. So peace out, stay safe, go read some Usagi Yojimbo.